everybody, or as Hank Kingsley would say, the great Hank Kingsley, hey now, which is really, with Love to Howard Stern, where that ultimately truly is a Hank Kingsley innovation from the great Larry Sanders show. As we see the previously on the Underground. They didn't do previously on a Larry Sanders show. If you have not watched the Larry Sanders show, cannot recommend enough. If you take nothing else from this, watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is about 20 years ahead of the rest of television. You're going to be very surprised. Watch the Larry Sanders show. Watch the prime run of Night Court. We'll hit a couple others, I'm sure, over the run of this. As we take a look at what led to this point, and the Luther situation particularly, as we head into the Crazy Joe Davola Fast and Furious style. It's funny, I actually just finally started watching all the Fast and Furious movies because I'd only seen bits and pieces of them other than maybe two of them. And man, they love to hit that family theme, don't they? Wow. So here we go. We're going to see Steve Jobs. He's not the real Steve Jobs. He's technically unavailable. Played by Matt Carlos. And at this point, he's basically shifted into, crybaby heel mode. And the idea here is, as set up last week, that as we see Luther and Shayna here, that if Luther loses, he's out of the Underground. And Shayna has made it very clear, basically, that's not something she's going to react very positively to. Little nod, as we said, Shayna is my nod to Sherry Martel, who I loved. I had the pleasure of working with both Sherry Martel and Miss Elizabeth. Loved them both. They were both really cool to me, as was Woman, might I add. Nancy was really, really cool to me. As we see Nick Lovin here as King, setting forth again sort of his manipulations. There's a little fly there buzzing around as well. That was a practical effect. That was not a CG fly. Oh, want to note, by the way, as an addendum to the last couple episodes here, I actually got a call from MVP last night. We were texting, and then he called me. We talked for about half an hour. I've mentioned on a couple of these, MVP and I talk pretty frequently, and I love MVP, in part because we have shared taste in really weird music all over the map. And we've talked about the Steely Dan Yacht Rock connection, but also MVP, a big fan of the late 70s, early 80s, very successful group for that period, Supertramp, who I have recently kind of gotten into. I would highly recommend Live in Paris, 1979. But like MVP and I end up with like a half an hour, 45-minute conversation about Supertramp and Steely Dan, and it looks like I think we are likely going to go see Steely Dan and Steve Winwood together at the Hollywood Bowl when he's here. And in fact, Sean Waltman, apparently, gigantic Steely Dan fan. I had no idea. I actually need to reach out to Sean anyway to say hi, but now that I know he's a fan of the Dan, we got to talk about that. As you see, a beautiful move there by Famous B. Right there into a beautiful moonsault, almost acai-style moonsault. Had the pleasure of working with Ultimo Dragon, also spending some time outside the ring with him. He signed me a mask that I've still got somewhere here. Really cool guy. Big fan. Ultimo Dragon, almost underrated at this point in terms of his actual legacy. As we see, there's that spin kick there. That was a little 90s New Japan, which I like. I'm a sucker for any mid to late 90s Puro. Early 2000s, you're speaking my language. And obviously, as I've mentioned, the Steve Jobs thing, down to the black turtleneck was kind of my, a little commentary on tech bros and sort of Apple cultists, etc. I will admit, I was very late to the whole, in the cult of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. I was more of a Steve Jobs guy, but I didn't hate Bill Gates. I was very late to the whole, Bill Gates is a bad guy thing. Obviously, this was pre-Jeffrey Epstein. And I remember, in fact, they did a TNT back in the WCW days. Some of you may remember because it was a big event. TNT did a TV movie, I think Pirates of Silicon Valley, about Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And I always thought Bill Gates looked like a caricature, but apparently, those filmmakers knew more than I did. Nice lariat there by Matt Carlos. And again, I look back as we watch these shows, and I really like the fact that, again, because the sizes are similar, And it's organic entirely to the concept of the show. You couldn't really do the show otherwise with super jacked, sort of overly gimmicked guys. That these guys could work, a style. They didn't have to work necessarily. You're going to see cruiserweight spots, obviously, because they're young and they have that ability. But they're laying it in there. They're throwing stiff stuff in a way that they wouldn't be allowed to be booked to do against bigger guys in a lot of cases, outside of hope spots and stuff like that. And I think that's, I believe it was, I may have misplaced my sapphic 90s folk singers, but I believe it was Ani DeFranco who sang 32 flavors and then some. And I think that's, when you look at wrestling, there's room for all of that stuff. I look at the Squared Circle Reddit, put out a shout out to my guys over there and gals. I get a lot of my news from there and Meltzer's, and then, I listen to Cornette and Conan and Disco's thing when I see their YouTube stuff come up. And, I've seen them talking about Nick Gage, who I've never seen work, but I know exactly what he is. I know what he does. I used to go to, indie shows in Detroit back when Sabu was popping in the mid-90s. I get the style. Certainly I watch tons of, Mick Foley and Terry Funk, working deathmatch and stuff, and Anita. And all that kind of stuff in my day. It's not really my flavor of ice cream, so to speak, but at the same time, I don't begrudge people that like that flavor. There is room for 32 flavors and then some. And I think that, I always tried in what I did to go, and I didn't want to give you vanilla or chocolate or strawberry. I didn't want to give you Rocky Road or Superman ice cream, if you know what that is if you're from the Midwest. I'd rather try to give you something, really different at a flavor level. Nice swanton bomb there. Beautiful camera angle on that, too. As we get to 3, and so Luther is going to survive. And again, I understand that the stuff I may do may not be for everybody, but it's not supposed to be for everybody, ultimately. The belief in creating something should be that your vision is commercial enough, unique enough, has something enough to offer, that it will find its audience as it goes. And by the way, here we now see Jobs making the full turn into full Heelville. He apparently just got the divorce papers from Melinda. I want to just rename him Gates at this point, just so I can keep making Jeffrey Epstein cracks, who was a legitimate businessman. Again, please don't send the Jeffrey Epstein people after me. If I somehow end up hanging from a bedsheet in a jail cell, I didn't do it. But I'm sure Jeffrey Epstein's a legitimate businessman. There is no place for anything like this. Just like John Gotti, a very legitimate businessman. No, Jobs! No, why, Jobs? Why? And so this is obviously done, you've continued again both guys' storylines. And in Jobs' case particularly, you're forwarding his character to now where there is just, the crybaby shtick the last time around should have done it. But this obviously here, and I do like that. That is such a little interesting affectation. Got a sort of Truman Capote quality to it. Murder by Death. That's another good movie. I'll recommend that one too. You want a completely non-politically correct movie that is very funny with an incredible cast. You too will believe that Peter Sellers can play a Chinese man. It's incredibly politically incorrect, but a very good movie, and including the performance of Truman Capote as Lionel Twain. And what is this? I guess that answers your question, ladies and gentlemen. Shayna has had enough, ladies and gentlemen. What's gotten into Shayna? Wow, my voice just broke there. I do promise I recorded that audio commentary post-puberty. It's breaking down in the underground. Oh, it's breaking down. That is a little homage both to the Mid-South, UWF Bill Watts era, and also to Scott Hall, who's the one who got me into doing that in the first place. That is a Jim Ross back in the day. It's breaking down in Tulsa. And Scott Hall used to do that, and he'd drop it on the air, he'd drop it off the air and shit. And I still use it. I use it to this day. And so I love it's breaking down in wherever. It is a Bill Wattsian nod, but it's my little nod of affection to Scott Hall. who with Kevin Nash and the aforementioned Steely Dan fan Sean Waltman all treated me really well in WCW. Love those guys. Talked to Nash actually not that long ago on the 25th anniversary of the NWO angle. Of course, my famous stint as the host of the NWO Hotline, and of course the host of the Miss NWO pageant. And Luther, as we jump all over the place here, you'll forgive me, I've had an adult cocktail tonight as I do this. Luther, clearly the cord severed with Shayna, but Luther has survived to fight another day. The crowd firmly behind him now, and so you know now coming out, let's be clear, this guy's a pretty clear babyface. This guy's a heel, and Shayna obviously a heel now too. She has gone the full sensational Sherry. It's a little nod to WrestleMania 7 with Macho Man losing to the Warrior and Sherry's freak out there. As we see our USC student Brandon Howard as Dredd setting up his next appearance. And speaking of students, the completely incorrectly numbered 1600 because those bastards changed the SAT, as I am legally required to complain about every time I do this. But I'm okay with it. I've made my peace. I'm going to have another drink. But Ryan Kidd and Brandon Howard, both great young men, great talents, excited to get to showcase them again. And, really fit the characters very well. Like 1600, the minute I saw Ryan, I was like, that's my character. That's exactly what I wanted. And so now we're going to see Stone and PW3, of course, Nick and Matt Jackson with King. And, of course, we're building for the jackpot, money, potential control of the underground. These two brothers, there's a woman in the middle. Liz is trying to sort of fix the situation. She's her own independent woman. She's going to do what she thinks is right. And now, wouldn't you know it, we're going to set up a big match. PW3 and Stone, they're going to eventually now get it on one-on-one in the underground.